Good afternoon. Welcome back to our weekly Beit Midrash. Hope everybody's doing well. Good to see y'all here, and good to be learning together this Thursday afternoon. Welcome to Parashat Vayachel, our parsha that we'll be reading this week. It's actually a double parsha, but we're going to look at Parashat Vayachel. We're not going to deal with Pekudei today, just because that's what I chose to teach on Vayachel, not Pekudei. And we're going to dive a little deeper into the mysticism today. As we've talked about, Hasidut is at its core a mystic movement. So we're going to dive a little bit into that Kabbalah, and we'll see some of it today. Not a spoiler alert, just something for you to look forward to as we're learning together. So let me get any preliminary questions while I'm getting this up on the screen.
I have a preliminary question. I have a preliminary comment.
Okay.
I am so dull that it took me to last week to realize that Hasidism and Chesed have something to do with each other.
Yes. Chesed usually, so it's interesting. The word Chesed, some scholars think that it really should be translated in the Torah itself as something along the lines of loyalty. At least that seems to be what the biblical meaning of it is. But by the rabbinic period, it comes to mean something along kindness, loving kindness, something like that. In rabbinic literature, Hasidim tends to be like the pious ones. It tends to have like an implication of those who are pious, which is kind of where the Hasidim of the Hasidut movement later on kind of say, like, we're the pious ones, because we really know the truth of Judaism. Not studying Gemara all day long, but living the joy of Judaism is really the pious part of it. But yes, there is a connection there as well with Chesed. Other questions, comments, thoughts before we jump into the Kedushat Levi today? So we're going to come back to Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. I warned you guys at the beginning when we started this, we'd probably study him a lot because he's one of my favorite Hasidic rebbes. And I didn't lie. We're going to keep coming back to him. So we're coming back to him today. Can you all see the screen, the text? Excellent. So we'll go ahead and get started with the Kedushat Levi today. If somebody wants to give us a start from this verse.
I'll do that. The work was enough for them for all the work to do it and more.
Good. So what are we talking about?
Building the Mishkan.
Good. The building of the Mishkan. Now we've spent the last few parshiot with Moses getting instructions from God on what the Mishkan is supposed to do, and now as we are concluding the book of Exodus, they're actually doing the work. It's great to read the instruction manual, but you still don't have a bookcase if you just read the instruction manual. You actually got to put the bookcase together. I use that as an example because it's one of the few pieces of IKEA furniture I can put together easily and well. So, yes, Mickey.
Rabbi, how long did it take to build the Mishkan?
That's a good question. I don't know offhand. I'd have to look it up. I don't remember offhand. I don't think it took an extensively long period of time.
You think they're talking about a year or 10 years or?
Probably. It seems from the Torah, it kind of happens pretty quickly. I'd have to look it up. I don't know offhand. I don't think it's like a year or two. I think it's actually like, it seems to be like a couple weeks or months.
Oh, really?
Because, what's one of the, when you're doing a major construction project, what's one of the biggest delays?
The architect,
Well, that's your fault, Eddie.
The
But,
supplies,
what else?
getting the supplies.
Getting the supplies, getting the materials. Well, they already have all the materials. It's all the stuff they brought out of Egypt. They don't have to wait on the materials. They already have it. So it's just a matter of putting the pieces together and melting things down and forming and all that. So yes, they are. So I don't think it took we don't get the impression it took a super long time, but it's not really clear either. I suspect the Torah somewhere will say, on this day of this month, they completed the work or something like that. But I don't remember the comparison of how long it actually took.
Thank you.
Yes.
I would think
Thank
that
you for not answering my question because you don't have an answer. Yes, Eddie.
I think, Bezalel probably took the longest if he had to carve all of those, whatever he used to cast all the finials and the crowns and all of that would have taken a long time, I would think.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah, I really don't know. I honestly have not given it a whole lot of thought, but what stands out about this verse, reading this verse? Eddie, if you want to read the next sentence, it'll kind of.
More.
This phrase, enough for them and more, seems to include a contradiction, since if it was enough for them, it's not more.
Right. So is it enough or is it more than enough? Those are two different concepts. If you have enough, then you got, the work was enough for them. Great. They were able to get the work done. If the work was enough for them and more, that means that there was more work for them to do than they actually could do. So he's immediately pointing out this little contradiction in the verse. Is it enough or is it more than enough?
Well, maybe more doesn't refer to the work, to the actual physical work.
Okay, what would it be referring to?
That would be the work with, I guess more of a spiritual and a faith kind of thing.
Okay, so playing rabbi for a moment. I play one on TV. It doesn't talk, looking at the verse itself, if you were reading this as a sentence, there's no other reference to what the subject could be other than the work.
Well, except that I guess I don't agree with Reb Levi. Who am I to disagree, right?
You can take that up with her later. Don't worry.
He's just glad he doesn't live with me. There's a whole lot of this going on. So, I mean, the way that I see it is that enough for them and more, the word is and. It's enough for them. And it's more than enough for them.
Right. So
I don't see them as mutually exclusive, I guess is what I'm saying.
So I guess the question is, how can something be enough and more than enough?
Yes. And I think it can.
How?
How?
I'm curious because
You don't see that. You don't see that.
I think the difference is, Cindy, that rabbi speaking, for Yitzhak, etc., is talking about one single thing, and you're turning that one thing into two different things.
Okay, I can
Well,
accept that.
Not so. No, I think I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from, because I'm thinking about it like a plate of food. So if somebody gives me a plate of mashed potatoes, I don't know why that's the first thing that came to mind. But if somebody gives me a plate of mashed potatoes, you can say, "Oh, that's enough for me." If it's enough, then it's not more than enough. It's enough.
No. And if you give me a plate of mashed potatoes and I eat 2/3 of them and I'm full, that's enough for me. And there's more. I didn't eat the other third. There's something else.
But then it would be that it was ended up being more than enough, not enough.
No, it was enough to state.
Well, again, you're doing two things. You've got your stomach is one
Yes.
thing and the plate is another thing.
Yes,
Okay, and it's enough in your stomach and more than enough on the plate. So again, you're dividing it into the one concept into two different concepts.
so I'm making the same mistake twice.
Well, I mean,
It's okay.
I want to argue. Yeah.
I don't think it's a mistake. I think it's just a matter of perspective. Like, I see what you're
Okay.
saying, but I think looking at it from the perspective of your stomach,
Yes, always.
it's either like you had enough to eat. If there's more food on the plate, then that means there was more than enough to eat, not enough. Like, yes, it was enough to satiate you.
Right.
There's still more, but it doesn't mean that you didn't get. You either got enough to satiate you, or you got more than enough. If
Okay.
you
I
ate
mean,
too many
I
mashed
see what
potatoes, that was more
you-
than enough. But
I see what you're saying. I'll stop. I'll stop.
I think I get where you're coming from as well. I think that's the perspective that I think Reb Levi Yitzchak is taking. Is that either there was enough work for them to do, or there was more than enough work for them to do. But it can't be enough and more than enough, because otherwise it's two things occupying the same philosophical space at the same time.
Okay, I can accept that. Thank you.
So now we're going to launch into the actual teaching. Eddie, you had a couple short ones. If you want to do one more, feel free.
A rabbi said Bezalel would know how to join the letters through which heaven and earth were created. The blessing one put wisdom, understanding, and knowledge in their hearts. Hashem, the blessing one, gave the strength to the righteous of each generation. For when the righteous deal in Torah and offer new interpretations, they create new heavens and new earths.
Okay, that's perfectly clear, right? We don't need to discuss that at all.
I want to think about it for a minute.
Okay. So there's a couple things going on here. So first, let's tackle the Midrash that's being offered here. Is that Bezalel knew how to join the letters through which heaven and earth were created. Let's tackle the Midrash first. If you look at the footnote at the bottom that I put here, I'll read it for you just because it might be a little small. The Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Bezalel knew how to join the letters through which heaven and earth were created. That's what we just quoted. Now he's going to prove it. It is written here with regard to Bezalel, God says to Moses, I have filled Bezalel with the Spirit of God in wisdom and understanding and in knowledge. And it is written there, elsewhere, it is written, God by wisdom founded the earth, by understanding God established the heavens. So, and then it is written, by God's knowledge, the depths were broken up and the skies dropped down the dew. So what's going on here is we have in this quote, these two verses from Proverbs, we have God through wisdom founded the earth, that God used God's wisdom to create the earth. By understanding, God established the heavens. By knowledge, the depths were broken up. So these these verses all have to do with creation and how God used wisdom, understanding, and knowledge for creation. Everybody good on the Proverbs part? Now, it says regarding Bezalel that I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. So we have a parallel here. God is filling Bezalel with the same wisdom, understanding, and knowledge that God used to create the earth.
So
Because they're using the same language, this means that it means the same thing. The same terms mean the same thing.
So does this mean does this a parallel between Bezalel's creating these objects and God creating the earth?
Exactly. So in Kabbalah, there's two important pieces to know in order to understand this. One is that God created the world through the Hebrew alphabet, so that the entire world, according to mystical tradition, was created through sequences of letters. So in a sense, you can almost think of it like DNA. When we do DNA, we label them with letters. It's the same kind of idea, that the letters form the foundation for the spiritual foundation for the entire world. Not sure it's really worth challenging that scientifically. Let's just kind of understand that that's the basis from which we're working on here. The second part that's important to know is that the Mishkan in mystical thought is seen as a microcosm of the world. So that the construction of the Mishkan, in some sense, is parallel to the God's construction of the world. And along with these Kabbalistic underpinnings, there is the idea that if you know the sequence of the letters, if you have this insight, if you study Kabbalah enough, you can actually imitate the creation of the world. Not supposed to do it, but you can do it. There's a, tied a little bit into this is there's a story in the Talmud where two rabbis are getting hungry and it's Friday night and they don't know what to do. So what do? They use their knowledge, their mystical knowledge of the letters to create a half goat or a third goat. It might be a third of a goat. There's a dispute whether it's a third of a goat or if it's a 3-year-old goat, but they create this goat, slaughter it, and then have it for Shabbat dinner. And then the Talmud says, don't do that. But they did it. You just don't do it. That's kind of what's going on here, is that if you know, Bezalel had this knowledge of how to create. God gave it to him. And now we get back to Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. God also gives it to the tzaddik of each generation, that through their Torah study and their ability to create new interpretations of the Torah, they're creating whole worlds by doing so. Spiritually, not physically.
if I could, that
Feel
reminds
free to comment from here.
that reminds me of one of my favorite, I guess it's Talmudic stories. I don't know exactly where Hasidic stories, which I'm sure, Rabbi, you know, but where the Baal Shem Tov is said to have created a beautiful service for Yom Kippur, and then he hears a voice telling him, "Yeah, that was a pretty good service, but there's a guy in the next town that's got a better one," and he goes to the next town and he finds out that this is a shepherd boy, and he goes out into the fields and he says to the shepherd boy, I hear you. And the shepherd boy starts singing, and he's singing the alphabet. And the Baal Shem Tov wants to know what's going on, and he says, "Well, I can't read and I can't write, but I know the alphabet, and so if I sing all these letters up to God, He'll know what to do with them."
Yeah, it's a popular Hasidic story, and it has a lot of variants to it. But yes, it's a good one.
So the idea of the letters creating and so on, just that it enriched that story
Yes.
For me.
Other comments, questions, thoughts? There's a lot there, so feel free to take a second to process it.
So when it says the righteous of each generation, they create new heavens and new earths. And obviously that's not meaning, some more planets. Expand on
What's up with that?
What's up?
Okay, so the tzaddik of each generation has the same ability that Bezalel has. Who is the tzaddik of each generation? Or the tzaddikim of each generation? Remembering tzaddik in Hasidic thought is usually a code word. It refers to the Rebbe.
Oh.
The Rebbe has this same ability that Bezalel has, by virtue of his great spirituality and connection to God and Torah learning and wisdom and he has this kind of connection that he is able to do this. Now, when the tzaddik deals in Torah, what is the tzaddik doing? He is opening up new spiritual pathways through the Torah, through the drashot that he gives. I know most of you are women. Unfortunately, there was not a lot of female tzaddik, female rebbes. I think there may have been like one who was like a prominent Hasidic leader, but that's why I'm intentionally not using gender neutral pronouns, because it's historically that's what it was. But through these new interpretations, you're opening up new spiritual pathways. And if you think in this sense, if you think of language as permutations of letters, by speaking, you are inherently creating. Fun fact, by the way, what's the great magic, the famous magical word,
Abracadabra.
which means
Not forgotten.
it's actually a little bit of there's some debate. It seems that it's actually based somewhat off either Aramaic or Hebrew. Abara kadabra. I will create according to my speech, according to what I say. So, in a sense, when you're speaking, you're creating things by that action. And in some sense, you kind of are. So let's just take this class as an example. I am teaching this class one way, and by doing so, I am, in some sense, manipulating your world by creating for you an understanding of what this text is saying. I'm creating your world by influencing you into a certain understanding of this text, right? If someone else were to teach it with a completely different understanding, they would be creating a separate world with a completely different set of understandings of what's going on. I think that's kind of how I am viewing this, is that there's some sense that you're spiritually creating worlds by your speech and by your Torah and by the way you interpret it, that because you are influencing other people's lives by doing so.
But it's like when we talk about Lashon Hara, we talk about creating and tearing down worlds with our words.
Yes. So the same kind of idea, yes. You can use, like every other tool that we have, you can use your speech for good or you can use it for evil. Tools do not, control themselves, so they depend on how you use them. Other questions, thoughts? So now we will come back to the Mishkan and Bezalel more specifically. Who wants to read next?
I can read it.
Please.
When they were building the Mishkan, the portable sanctuary they used in the wilderness, they would direct their Holy Spirit towards divine wisdom, and they would unite and combine the holy letters with all the tools and actions that were done for the Mishkan. If they wanted to direct their wisdom expansively, they could have gone on forever, for the divine spirit was upon them. But they needed to put a limit on it, which the righteous of the future would add, coming and teaching, would be to which the righteous in the future would add, coming and teaching Torah on the work of the Mishkan. Each of the righteous, according to their own knowledge, would uncover hidden wisdom in every word and every tool, making new unions with the divine spirit.
Okay. What's he saying?
The work was enough and it was more.
Good. How was it enough? Let's start with there.
I mean, I'm like a dog with a bone. It was enough because it was enough in that moment for them to create the Mishkan. But in addition, it's more because the work ended and there is still room to create in each generation with each Sadi adding on to the work.
Good. To put it slightly, like you have the right idea. I'm just going to rephrase it slightly. Is that
Sure.
The generation who built the Mishkan could have uncovered every divine secret if they had really wanted to. They had the wisdom, the knowledge, and the understanding. But they didn't. They left something, they left things so that future generations would have learning to uncover themselves. It was enough for them in that moment, as Cindy said, and they intentionally left some over so that future generations would be able to connect. Questions, comments, thoughts? I'm thinking of this a little bit like a parent right now. Is like, sometimes my son will come like, what's this? Like, what's this, the answer to this question? And they'll ask me a question, be like, go figure it out. Right? Like, I know the answer, but I have to leave room for him to be able to find his own answers as well. And sometimes that's part of the challenge of parenthood, is that we know the answers that our children don't. And we need to be able to step back and let them figure out the answers on their own. We need to put a limit on our own knowledge. We need to kind of draw the line and say, enough. You need to be able to do this yourself. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? I think we've largely tied it up, but if somebody wants to take us home and finish the last paragraph.
I'll read it. This is similar to how Hashem, the blessing one, left a little strength in the work of creation. God put a limit and left some behind for the righteous, so they would be able to make something new through this creativity. It's the same thing they did with the work of the Mishkan. This, that scripture writes, the work was enough for them. They put a limit on the work. To do it, that is to say, to repair and unite the divine knowledge, since they were able to direct their actions according to their own knowledge. But more, here we go, Cindy, since they left some over for the righteous and the wise in every generation to hear and learn the order of the work of the Mishkan, to continue building and adding to their own knowledge as much as they were able. If they had put this first, we wouldn't have had the discussion.
That would have ruined the entire thing.
That's
We wouldn't have had the
right.
discussion. So look, the Talmud has a phrase that one of God's names is El Shaddai. What does El Shaddai mean? So the scholarly view of it, is that it was probably some kind of reference to fertility. In Hebrew, Shiddaim are breasts. So it's God, the God who is like, God is a nurturer, or God who of fertility, who is able to provide and support. The Talmud has a different view on it, though, in which it's that El Shaddai is El, God, She'amar Dai, that God could have created a world that was infinite. God could have created a boundless world that would have gone on for eternity, but God had to put limits on the world. And so God is the El, God, She'amar, who said, die, enough. And by the way, it's the same phrase in the verse. It's dayam, which is like enough for them. God is one who put limits on the world that God created and like told the sky to stop, told the earth and the waters to stop, and that this is your boundary, this is where you go. And God left some work. It seems here that he implies that God created an imperfect world for us so that we would have something to work with. There's a great song from like the 90s that I was just thinking of. It was like there's a verse and it's like, I met God this afternoon riding on an uptown train. I said, don't you have better things to do? He said, if I do my job, what would you complain about? So like, I feel like that's a little bit of this too, is that, God could have created this perfect world, but then what would be the point of humanity? There'd be no room for us then, because we'd be unneeded. Rather, God needed us as a way to finish and finalize God's creation and turn it into the world that God envisioned. As I mentioned, the Mishkan is a microcosm of the world. On some level, Bezalel, Aholiab, the Israelites could have uncovered all of the wisdom of the Mishkan in their time. But in the same way, they said, die, enough. We're going to stop here. It's up to the future generations to continue uncovering the mysteries from here. Questions, comments, thoughts?
I think that if we say that God is infinite, then I would think that the world he created is infinite and that he would want us to continue to delve deeper into what the world he wants us to create or how we understand his world. I wouldn't think he would want a limit to that, or she or they.
So let's kind of play this out. With all the galaxies that are in existence, if they were one giant world and it was all one united being, then we would have learned all of it already, because we would have been here. Like we would have been on that already and we would have learned it all. But instead, thousands of years later, we're still nowhere near understanding the cosmos. The God's creation, in some sense, is infinite. There are galaxies way beyond whatever we can actually comprehend or even observe. We're stuck with what we can with our limited vision of what we can do with it. But part of our job is to continue exploring, continue learning, continue building upon that past knowledge to be able to continue growing. I was just reading something, I think this past week, where they saw a star that is in the process of exploding. She probably did this 15,000 years ago from what they were saying, but but it's, in watching it, they're learning more about how the dust and particles and gases are coming together in the star and exploding out at the same time. And so there's they're learning a lot about what this means and how this can influence planet construction. That's something we couldn't have done 100 years ago. So we're continuously building on our knowledge of God's infinite creation based on our limited creation. Does that make sense? Other questions, comments, thoughts? Some of you look like you're still reading, so I'll keep it up for another minute. But I think a little bit of what this teaching is trying to encourage us is to say that the answers are not all revealed already. That there's always more to learn and to uncover. And part of our job and our responsibility is to continue that process, to continue uncovering the mysteries, the secrets, the learning, what the Mishkan is, was, and can be, as a way of continuously trying to uncover God's will through it.
This line here at the end, to continue building and adding to their own knowledge as much as they are able, it makes me think of that line that that each contributed to the Mishkan, each in their own way, kind of thing, or each as they had. What was the line that we read from the Torah? Each in his own.
And that's, I think, is each according to their own hearts, or according to what their heart desired, something like that.
Okay, so I see a parallel here to, like you said, that building the world is like building the Mishkan, and each of us is, again, we're not supposed to finish the work; we're supposed to begin the work, and here in each in our own way, to the best that we can, to the most that we have the best we can contribute.
Yes. The Torah, the Midrash kind of talks about this with the 10 Commandments also, is that everybody kind of understood the 10 Commandments according to their own abilities. And I think some of it is our world is not the same world that our ancestors lived in. It's not even the same world our parents lived in. And so I think there's a level here at which, because there's still more to uncover, we can continuously try to keep learning and applying the secrets of the world, the Mishkan, to new and unfamiliar circumstances. And this is the way that religion survives, is by adapting and understanding that the text is not static, but that it continuously speaks to us in every generation.
But certainly we are reading this through a conservative Judaism lens. And yes, we as conservative Jews learn to, wrestle with the Torah and make it relevant to our lives today. Certainly through, a laborious process. We don't just indiscriminately do that. But the more orthodox, more I don't want to say left wing, but more like literal interpretations of the Torah, wouldn't this fly in the face of that?
Not necessarily. This is part of the great paradox of orthodoxy, is that for Orthodox, even pretty right-wing Orthodox, they'll say that the Torah is the Torah, and the Torah was given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai, both in its written form that we read from on Shabbat and in every interpretation of the Torah that will ever is, was, or will be, was given to Moses at Mount Sinai. But at the same time, they still have to make sense of it for their current world. And I guess in some sense, in their perspective, this interpretation has been sitting here waiting for them to uncover since Sinai. It's been there the entire time. We just needed to unearth it. I think that's kind of how they would understand this. It is part of the paradox of orthodoxy in that they like to pretend that it's all been the same forever, but they kind of intellectually know it hasn't. You know, the world 2023, no matter how you spin it, is not the same as the 1600s when the Shulchan Aruch was written. So the rules and the principles still apply. We just have to apply them to a modern context. But that still means having to unearth and study and build based on what the Torah tells us.
Or it would seem that even, even in their study of the Talmud, acknowledges or is based on the idea that there are different ways of study, of interpreting things, and there's no fixed interpretation. I mean, many things are left undecided or reconsidered later, or
yeah. So I mean, look, a lot of the things that are left undecided are kind of like, we'll do the best we can. There's a phrase called teku, which means that this dispute or is left unresolved. Like we can't find an adequate answer to it. So usually it comes down to, we follow the halakha the best we can, even though we don't know what the actual answer is. But there's some commentators argue that teku is actually an abbreviation. That means that Elijah will come and resolve all questions and difficulties, so that, we'll do the best we can, but when Elijah comes, he'll actually tell us what the answer really is. Yes, Mickey.
Within Hasidism, is there a recognition of new interpretations, or is this it?
What do you mean, is this it?
If what we're reading here is the same interpretation that they would say is correct today, even though hundreds of years have passed.
So look, I think they'd say, so one of the principles is that we can't override previous generations. So if a previous generation made a halakhic decision, we can't override that halachic decision without like a massive court to be able to do so. But on some level, he says here that, the blessing one gave the strength to the tzaddik of each generation for when the tzaddik deals in Torah and offers new interpretations to create new heavens and new earths. I think in classic Hasidism, there is this kind of concept understanding that they are creating something and they are interpreting something new. And there's an idea of chidushim, of being able to uncover and interpret something new that hasn't been taught yet. If you can do so, because kol hakavod to you. I mean, that's impressive to be able to do, to find the new interpretation that hasn't been found in 2,000 years. But that's essentially what part of the endeavor is to continuously uncover new novel interpretations that people hadn't thought of. To do that, you need to know what has been thought of, and you need to understand the rules and the principles and all that, which is why they spend so much time in yeshiva. But the idea is to be able to come up with new novel interpretations that apply to our lives today. Even today, like they'll put out books of Chidushei Ha-Rav so-and-so, like new interpretations of such and such rabbi will put out a book and call like his novel interpretations based on his.
But would that have to come from the wise person of this generation?
So it's an interesting question of how do you read tzaddik? Is tzaddik hador, or tzaddikim shebechol dor vador? Is it one, or are there several?
Mhm.
And I think you could probably read it in either way. Whether that there's one person who is responsible for it, or whether there's multiple. I translated it as a singular, but the Hebrew is actually in the plural, that there's tzaddikim, so that anybody who is a tzaddik is able to do it. The challenge is, to be a tzaddik, you need to have a certain level of humility. And if you have that certain level of humility, how do you consider yourself a tzaddik?
It would seem like each group of Hasidim, they each have their own rebbe, right?
Right.
And they're going to consider their rebbe a tzaddik.
Correct. So I think within that sense, yes. But I'm just saying for the larger community, especially those who are non-Hasidic, to call yourself a tzaddik, if you're calling yourself a tzaddik, you're already kind of failing the humility test. But if you have the humility, then you can't call yourself the tzaddik to be able to do it. So it becomes kind of a circular, problem. But within Hasidic communities, yes. I mean, the leader is the tzaddik. The rebbe is the tzaddik, and so they are gifted with this ability, somewhat genetically according to them, because it does get passed down, but also somewhat through their own what's the right word, their own merits and their ability to inspire and be able to create chidushim that would inspire their community.
And in fact, does anybody call themselves a tzaddik? Isn't that something that generally is that other people call you because you're
usually after you die also. Most of the books that the Hasidic rebbes wrote were published after their death. There's a couple exceptions, but a lot of them were written after their death. So that way they can say, this was written by the great tzaddik. Now we can call him a tzaddik because he's not here to argue with us. So yes. Other questions, comments, thoughts?
I thought this was a really beautiful lesson and I enjoyed it. Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
I agree.
I appreciate y'all being here to learn together. Kol hakavod to y'all.
Thank
To
you.
learn together. Wishing everybody a good week. If I don't see you before then, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
If I do see you, then I wish you Shabbat Shalom then. And if I don't see you on Shabbat, Shavua Tov, and I'll see you next week, God, if not before. So be well, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.